Hello, welcome to the Dcpc, also known as DC's Political Corner. I'm your host, DC. Here we talk about just stuff that I find interesting in this crazy, wacky world. Whether it be news, politics, or interesting stuff going on in history. It's weird. This is the second show I've done in a row, so kudos there. Wish I had some clapping. Anyways, yeah, it's awesome. Gonna hopefully try to do this every Tuesday. Although I don't know about next Tuesday because that's the election. I don't know if I necessarily want to be streaming then, but we'll see. We shall see. Bear with me. Yeah, so let's just get right into our topics for today. We're going to be talking about Trump's Madison Square Garden rally, which is, being called, it hails echoes to a Nazi rally that was there, I believe, in 1934. So, 90 years ago, there was a Nazi rally there, and this kind of emanates that same sort of energy. So, it's interesting. Yeah, they pulled out all the favorites. They even had, Jewish guys saying, why would I come to a Nazi rally? But they still did. So, awesome. Yeah. We talk about the Washington Post, LA Times backlash. They refused to endorse a candidate because of pressure from Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post. The LA Times is owned by a South African family. I'll explain more. But because of this lack of endorsement, and there have been op-eds written about it, they're losing subscribers. We'll talk more about the Israel-Iran conflict, and what's, happening next. So far, it's just been trading off missiles, which, is good in terms of restraint, but who knows? With it could escalate. It could be a nothing burger. I mean, Israel's got to worry about fighting a war on 7 fronts now, where they're having a ground battle in 2 of them and not doing very good. So maybe they should focus on that. But what do I know? Then we're going to talk about the Massachusetts ballot questions, because I was supposed to cover that last week, but forgot. So we'll talk about those and why you should vote yes to all of them if you live in the state. And finally, to round everything out, we're going to watch a series, this creator named Eyes Wide Open made a series of videos on the history of the CIA. So we'll be taking a look at that, because I find the history of the CIA quite interesting. It's a very interesting, it's interesting how they became a clandestine operation with their history in the OSS during World War II, which then involved, and then their sort of clandestine activities across the planet, which, caused a lot of destabilization, especially in the third world. So yeah, that's that. I saw Venom The Last Dance on Friday. Yeah. Friday or Saturday. One of those days. And it was good. I enjoyed it. It was an interesting sort of they advertised it as the last movie, but it's just like they set up something bigger by the end, so who knows, maybe they'll have more of them, or it's just a way for them to like get them all into the MCU, because I know there was some multiverse stuff going on with Venom where it was at least in the background. Like nothing, he didn't actually do anything because it was all of the like No Way Home stuff. They ended up taking all of the like Spider-Man characters, villains and whatnot, and they all got transported to different universes, or at least that was the thought. And they were setting it up to be like, well, and then there's a Craven movie coming out, which should be interesting. It's got Russell Crowe and the guy who plays Quicksilver in the MCU. So that should be interesting for sure. I'm probably gonna go see that. Definitely want to go see the new Gladiator movie whenever that comes out. I think it's supposed to come out in November or December. There's a couple other movies that I'm looking forward to seeing in the coming weeks. But it's 1 week out to elections. Yay. And then we never need to talk about it again, and it's not going to happen. We're going to keep talking about him, and then it's going to get exhausting. Yay. Okay. Well, with that, let us get right into our news portion. All right. So we have CBS News. I am sort of behind. All right. There we go. All right. Now we can hide me. Cool. All right. So, Trump faces bipartisan criticism from Madison Square Garden rally.
America decides this election, and make no mistake, we are already deep into it, is no garden party. You've probably heard about the Madison Square Garden Trump rally and the quote-unquote jokes told there, jokes that Republicans in competitive races are now falling all over themselves to denounce as racist. But did you hear this?
Who's going to stand up for our daughters? Who's going to stand up for the girls of America, the women of America, the families of America?
Oh, God, I hate this guy so much. He's a Weasley little worm. He is quite literally Trump's Jewish Goebbels. He is a full-blown Nazi. He believes in all of the Nazi rhetoric. And he just makes my skin crawl. He's just a skinwalker.
Who's going to stand up and say the cartels are gone, the criminal migrants are gone, the gangs are gone, America is for Americans and Americans only?
Who is an American? Who gets to have the American dream, and who will decide?
What he did last night is not a discovery. It is just more of the same and maybe more vivid than usual. Donald Trump spends full time trying to have Americans point their finger at each other. fans the fuel of hate and division, and that's why people are exhausted with him.
Voters are making up their minds right now. 45 million ballots have already been cast. That is roughly 28% of the entire 2020 election turnout. And as this has been going on, as you may have heard, fires have been set inside ballot drop boxes. That has happened in Arizona, Oregon, and Washington. The Department of Homeland Security today issued a warning about extremists online openly discussing attacking.
Yeah, so it's already started. Like, people have already started tampering with the election, and it's just like they're the ones who are like, it's always people on the right. They're just like, oh, we want election integrity. Oh, we want all of the ballots, all of the ballots being counted, and then it's just like, and then they go ahead and light a ballot box on fire. So, real cool, guys.
Election workers or sabotaging ballot boxes. This election, as I just said, no garden party. The campaigns continue to move rapidly through the battleground states, and that is where we begin. I want to go to Nicole Killian, who's with former President Trump in Georgia, and Ed O'Keefe, who is traveling with Vice President Harris in Michigan. Nicole, let me start with you. The last night's rally in Madison Square Garden is coming under some form of criticism from both parties. What's been the campaign response?
Well, some form of criticism, I think, puts it mildly, because we have heard a widespread condemnation all the way from President Biden to Vice President Harris to many of the former president's GOP allies, particularly in Congress, whether that is Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, some of the New York Republicans who are in very tough races there outside of Madison Square Garden, like Anthony Dcpc, who said that he is a proud Puerto Rican, but disagrees with some of the comments that were made at the rally last night. But look, the Trump campaign has made clear that it didn't vet these comments or these comedians' jokes before he went on stage. And an official did tell us in a statement that this does
I just realized I was muted this whole time. Ha 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 ha. All right. They're referring to Tony Heathcliff. I don't know. He's the guy behind the Kill Tony podcast, where they like bring on amateur comedians and then they roast them. I mean, I've only seen like clips of it. I've never actually seen a full episode. But it's usually like the other more funny comedians who are kind of doing most of the legwork. Like, he'll have like Shane Gillis on. They did a whole like Trump and Biden thing where Shane Gillis was Trump, and it was pretty funny. And they're all like Joe Rogan orbiters. Like, when Joe Rogan moved to Texas, they all moved with him. So yeah, and he's been known even in the comedy world as being like unfunny, like super unfunny. So much so that somebody who was like an opener even said that the club manager went up to him in the green room and was like, "Oh, so you're gonna be funny tonight?" Yeah, he made a joke about, I mean, they might cover it, but he made a joke about Puerto Ricans. That's what they're referring to. It was like, "Oh, it's a garbage island. Here there's a island of garbage in the ocean. I think it's called Puerto Rico." It's just so bad. because there actually is a garbage island. This man is just unfunny. He supposedly wrote for the roasts, like all the roast series that Comedy Central have, or at least the newer iterations, and he was at the roast of Tom Brady. I don't know.
Not reflect the views of the former president or the Trump campaign.
And I want to go to you. What are you hearing from the vice president, and what has the campaign, if anything, made of the events in Madison Square Garden yesterday?
Hang up and dial back again.
Major, if you're trying to talk to me, unfortunately, I can't hear you right now, so why don't you ask Nicole another question?
Okay. I will do that right now. Nicole, for the audience's benefit, in case you haven't seen it, I just want to play one of the quote-unquote jokes told at the Trump rally in Madison Square Garden. Control room, let's run that.
Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Yeah. See? And it's just like, there are so many Puerto Ricans. Like, in the one place to do this joke, you're doing it in New York City, where if you're gonna have Puerto Rican Trump supporters, they're gonna be there. And so much so that you have, like, Puerto Rican, you have Bad Bunny, who's like one of the biggest Puerto Rican musicians. He's like, yeah, I'm in on Kamala. It's just like, it's just not a good joke. You're supposed to, like, as a comedian, you're supposed to go after, like, you know, the elites, the rich, you know, people who aren't marginalized. Like, that's called punching down. And it's just not funny. None of the, like, great comedians will ever do anything like this. And yeah, and if any, it's just like, it's just it's bad form. It's gross. It's not even funny. Like, it's not even funny.
So, Nicole, you said the campaign is trying to distance itself from that. Does it in toto believe that the rally in Madison Square Garden was to its benefit, meaning worth more than all the negative blowback that's occurred in the ensuing hours?
Well, for those here in the crowd here in Georgia, which is quite far from Madison Square Garden, you know, they view last night's rally as a hit. We just heard from Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia, who tried to spin the events of last night, saying that, you know, while liberals and Democrats may be offended, she is offended, and the crowd here should be offended by Democrats' policies over the last decade plus, and that they should be offended that Democrats have referred to former President Trump as a fascist or at times as Hitler. So from her standpoint, she believes that it's Republicans who should be offended, and continues to insist, as many speakers here on stage have, that, you know, the rally last night was a huge success.
It's also worth pointing out that on more than one occasion, the former president, that is to say former President Trump, has referred to Vice President Harris as a communist and a fascist. Georgia, you're there, Nicole. What's the atmosphere? What is the...
So which is it? Are you a communist or are you a fascist? And I hate this people make the argument, oh, the Nazis were socialists, it says so in their name. It's just like, no. Socialism and fascism are on the complete opposite spectrums. So you can't be a socialist and be a fascist. It just, like, it doesn't make sense. Oh, whatever.
The campaign ground game there and expectations for them in Georgia?
Well, I think what's interesting, Major, is we're here at the campus of Georgia Tech. And so, this is a college campus. I was just with the former president over the weekend when he was at Penn State. And he has visited a few other campuses as well, trying to really appeal to young voters, in particular young men. We heard from the president over the weekend in a very long, probably one of his longest interviews yet, with podcaster Joe Rogan, which racked up millions of views. But it really is a strategy on the part of the Trump campaign to try to micro-target some of these demographics, whether it's young voters, whether it's young men. And the Harris campaign, for its part, has done a similar outreach and strategy to similar demographics and other demographics as well. So this is kind of part of the new normal of both campaigns, really kind of going after those smaller niche audiences, because, as you know, any demographic could potentially shift the election. And in terms of the significance of Georgia, as you very well know, Major, this is a critical battleground state. Obviously, a lot of people remember what happened here in Georgia in 2020, where the former president asked then Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to find him the votes, which really set off a firestorm, if you will, in the sense that the former president ultimately was indicted for alleged election interference, along with a number of co-defendants. So for the Trump campaign, they certainly would like to get this state back in their column. But that being said, this is now, to a certain extent, a purple state. Some still think it's red and want to keep it red, but after President Biden flipped the state in 2020, Democrats certainly want to hold on to it, particularly after those two Senate victories with Senator Ossoff and Warnock. So there is quite a battle here on the ground in Georgia, and that's why the former president continues to come here time and again.
Nicole Killian, thank you. We have great hopes that our communications with Ed O'Keefe at least have been partially restored. Ed, you had a chance to talk to Debbie Dingell, who knows a fair amount about election politics in Michigan. What did she tell you?
She told us, Major, that she's been begging the Harris campaign to come specifically to Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's in the 6th district of Michigan, and she...
Yeah, of course they want her to come to Michigan. This is also one of her weakest points. It's just and one of the reasons why she could lose is because she refuses to delegate with the Palestinian and Arab and Muslim communities that live in Michigan. A lot of them are Democratic Party loyalists, have seats in the Democratic Party, are part of the Democratic Party. A lot of them were delegates at the DNC who were not allowed to speak because they were Palestinian, because they were Arab, because they were Muslim. And we have, because we don't want to talk about the genocide that's going on, and she doesn't want to give even a voice to the individuals who don't, the individuals who believe honest, they want to vote for Kamala, they really, really do, but the genocide is their one issue. The Israel is their issue that they will not back out on. And I agree with them. They shouldn't back down on this. It's honestly kind of ridiculous that Kamala just won't meet them halfway. Because she keeps saying, we're working on a ceasefire. We're working on a ceasefire. They've been saying that since October 8th. Since October, right, of 2023. They've been saying this for over a year, that they've been working nonstop on a ceasefire. It's just no, you're not. Because you're sending billions of dollars in arms to Israel. You're clearly not looking for a ceasefire. There have been, and also it's not about the hostages either, because if it were, they'd be home already, right? Hamas didn't want to keep them this long. They were willing to, day after October 10th, they sent a message to the Israeli government. Hey, we're willing to exchange all the hostages if you release a couple thousand Palestinian prisoners who were there without trial, without charges, who were tortured, sexually assaulted, all sorts of bad stuff. And yeah, October 10th, 2023, they were ready to give them up, right? That's all of these. The sole purpose of this was to get Palestinians home. And that was their one kind of issue. All the other stuff was kind of like talks about, normalizing relations, essentially lifting the siege that Gaza has been under for decades. And just concessions that people were demanding. But nope, Israel said, no, we're just going to go in. We are going to flatten the land. And now we come here, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are dead. And for a lot of people, that's a red line that they just will not meet Kamala at. And it's really a shame because the American president has the ability to end this war, to end the genocide. I talked about this last week about the history, about other presidents who have done it. Ronald Reagan, Dwight Eisenhower, a bunch of American presidents have stopped conflict in this area for less than what was done.
Points out that there were more Democratic votes in this part of the state in the last few statewide competitive elections than any other, and she needs to be spending more time here. Take a listen.
Most people don't realize that the 6th congressional district has more Democratic votes since the redistricting than any district in the state.
Really?
We had more Democratic votes in 2022, more Biden votes in the primary, more uncommitted votes than the Dearborn district, et cetera, and then more Democratic votes in the primary.
Can she win?
I'm going to tell you, neither candidate has won. I am Debbie determined, and I'd rather be in our shoes than his shoes right now.
It was around it.
Oh, she makes a good point. Like I personally cannot support Kamala Harris at this point because of her stance on Israel-Palestine. That's a W that she's just giving up. I don't really care about the rest of her policies at this point. Cool, you plan on giving small businesses $50,000. You plan to give podcasters $50,000 so that they can make more podcasts, because we need more podcasts. We need them. They are vital. And as she said, Ann Arbor has a huge uncommitted population. Those uncommitted votes are just free votes that the Kamala Harris administration is just throwing. Yeah, we don't need them. Okay. But it's the difference between you securing victory and you being neck and neck with Trump, which is what it's at now. It's really up in the air at this point on who can win. And that it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be a repeat of 2016, which, listen, I thought in 2016 that Hillary Clinton had it in the bag. It's just like, there's no way people are going to vote for Trump. There's no way. And then come out of our lib hole, realize, oh, right, maybe she should have campaigned in battleground states. Maybe she should have hit the Midwest. Maybe she should have made some, like, points, right, that were whatever. Don't say Pokemon Go to the polls. Just don't be that cringy. Yeah.
This time 8 years ago, Major, you'll remember that she was warning that Hillary Clinton could lose Michigan, and then she did. And she pointed out.
Oh, and I'm drinking the Coke Oreo. It's the 0 sugar one. It's not bad. Like, chocolate and cola kind of go together. It's not as gross as it sounds, because I know what you're thinking. It's actually, it makes the cola sort of, it's more subtle. It doesn't taste like a cookie, but yeah. And then I had a Coke Zero earlier today, and I was like, is this what this tastes like? And it's just like, oh, right, I've been drinking this Oreo Coke Zero for I don't know how long. I got a 6-pack of them, and I just wanted to try them. Not bad. I'm probably never going to get them ever again, but, you know, I got 6 of them. Whatever. Anyways.
Out there that she doesn't know quite who's going to win because it is that close. One thing to watch for here tonight on the outskirts of the campus of the University of Michigan, what kind, if any, protest is there regarding the war in the Middle East? Remember, there are hundreds of thousands of Arab or Muslim Americans who live in and around Detroit, and they've made it a big cause of concern for them because they know so many who've died, friends and neighbors, or their friends and neighbors have friends and relatives who died in that conflict, and they're holding it against the Biden administration and, by extension, the vice president. Let's see if she talks about it tonight and how she responds to any interruptions.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much. Also, our thanks to Nicole Killian coming to us from Georgia. I want an invitation to you. Watch our election night coverage with the entire CBS News team.
Yeah. So, again, she's just throwing away free votes because they will not move their stance on Israel. And it's a shame because people are hurting and they feel hurt. There was Trump did a rally in Michigan where they had Muslim members of the community come out to endorse him because he's running as the Dove president. He's going to end the war. Under him, there wouldn't be a war. We would have pulled out of Afghanistan better. Because, of course, he can say these things. He doesn't have a... I mean, that's how he ran in 2016. He ran as the Dove, the peaceful Dove. I'm going to end war. And this is what's going to happen when people who would normally vote Democrat, like you're running into a Bernie Bros situation where you had guys who wanted Bernie to be the nominee. And then when he got snubbed, they were like, fuck it, I'm voting for Trump. And that's how, and he got a significant amount of votes there. It's happening again. Not in such huge numbers. I mean, you have a small amount of Muslims who are, it's also very weird that they're doing this because he made a Muslim ban. Like, Like, there's no way around it. Like, this guy just doesn't like Muslim people. Like, he's Islamophobic, so it's very weird that they're voting for him. Anyways, let's move on to the Washington Post, LA Times debacle.
A crisis this morning among legacy media when it comes to covering presidential elections. The Washington Post announcement that it will not endorse a candidate this year or in any future races has reportedly led to thousands of canceled subscriptions and even some resignations. It is the first such decision for the paper in 36 years, but its publishers claim it is, quote, tradition. CBS News correspondent Kelly O'Grady is here in Studio 55 and joins me now. First of all, welcome to CBS News. It's good to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you because you have a business background,
Yes.
much similar to myself, and so we're going to be able to dig into these really sort of meaty business discussions like this one. Oftentimes people react emotionally to situations like this one. I saw a really interesting tweet from a reporter at the Washington Post saying, look, the decision that the Post made is the owner's decision, not the reporter's decision. By canceling your subscriptions, you're not hurting Jeff Bezos, you're hurting the reporters who need the subscriptions to be able to do the reporting that people count on. So,
Right. But this is a way for them to be able to protest how the paper stands. Yes, it is going to hurt the people. It's not going to hurt Jeff Bezos. He's got plenty of money. But this decision is going to hurt the people who actually do the reporting. Like, honest, good, hardworking journalists who just want to present people with facts, who want, who stand for the truth, who want to make sure that these people are that the readers are informed. And when you do stuff like this, you're ostracizing all of those people.
explain what this means for Bezos writ large if people are canceling subscriptions or they say they don't want to shop at Amazon anymore.
Yeah, so I mean, the Amazon point I think is is the more salient one. You know, I think here, if you have someone cancel subscriptions, you know, this for Bezos is not the meat of where he's making his money, right? This is sort of more of a passion project. But if you start to see folks, you know, express their frustration about a product that they thought had a certain brand, that they expected a certain message from, and they say, look, I'm not going to go shop at Amazon. I'm not going to go pay for a ride on Blue Origin. Not many of us can. That's his space endeavor. You might start to see more of that pressure. I will say, Vlad, this is something that we've seen from a lot of businesses over the past 5 to 10 years. You've seen people take more of a step into that realm with political and social issues, whether they feel empowered or pressured to do so. Right. And you do see consumers saying, hey, that's not why I come to you.
And yet it doesn't really affect them, right, Kelly? You have people like Elon Musk who's out there campaigning for the president. A lot of billionaires, Mark Cuban is campaigning for Kamala Harris. These business interests that they have are so diversified. And we were having a conversation earlier this morning at CBS Mornings in our other studio, and we were sort of talking about the fact that even if you are a billionaire like Elon Musk or you're somebody like Jeff Bezos, owning certain properties, Twitter or X or the Washington Post isn't really seen as something that's going to generate income for you or make you any money. It's a prestige thing or it's a passion project.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Though what I will say is when Elon Musk took the step into that world, he said, you know, I'm going to make this the virtual town square. You did see the stock price of one of his other companies, Tesla, go down. And so, look, I mean, Tesla's doing fine. They're crushing it. But you do see that investor concern, that consumer concern. And I will note, Reed Hastings, who's the co-founder of Netflix, also got into this area where he went and he gave $7 million to VP Kamala Harris's campaign. And then all of a sudden, people started canceling their Netflix subscription. They said, this is not why I come to this. But there is always that distinction of
Yeah, but there's a difference between having a print media organization endorsing a candidate versus, you know, somebody like the owner of like Netflix. Right? There's a complete difference. Like the Washington Post, LA Times have always have always endorsed candidate, provided facts, all of this stuff. Like, I don't really care if the CEO of Netflix gives money to Kamala Harris. It doesn't really matter in the long run, and people canceling their Netflix subscriptions for this is kind of silly. There's other reason to cancel your Netflix subscriptions, like the fact that they took away 30 Palestinian projects from their library. They said it was because the contract expired. Oh, I think I did something. The camera does not like bunny ears. Oh. I put on the... Okay. There we go. I forget, I have gestures on my camera, so it'll like follow me and stuff. Anyways, yeah. Yep, it's just a dub that they're... No, it's... Yeah, it's two totally different situations.
A business leader versus the business, but from the consumer perspective, they're kind of saying, well, look, this is the same thing.
So the other point that you made to me earlier this morning, which I hadn't thought of,
Yeah, because people are stupid.
was that there can be, I mean, I know that someone will say, look, if you cancel your subscription to the Washington Post, you're hurting the reporters. It's not going to hurt Jeff Bezos. But sometimes these things do hurt. You pointed out in the case of Bud Light, for example, where people took to social media to express displeasure about something.
That's right. You know, you have, in that case, Bud Light, right? They had the ad where it was, some thought it was controversial. They worked with a trans influencer, and people stopped buying the product. They stopped.
Okay, but did they? I mean, Kid Rock, if anything, it was a PR stunt that ended up working out for them. I don't think that them doing this really affected. People are still going to buy it. I mean, Kid Rock still had to buy all those cans of Bud Light in order to shoot them. So I don't know. I feel like it worked.
Going to the store, drinking Bud Light. They said, no, I'm going to go with Corona instead. And you saw the stock price of Anheuser-Busch come down. In this case, I will say, to be fair, they're saying, look, this is a return to our roots. We're not going to do this. And so we do have to, mention that as well. But when you're a consumer and you see something like this happen and you vote with your wallet, and I will leave you with this, Vlad, Michael Jordan said, hey, Republicans buy sneakers too. And that's why he never endorsed anyone.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I do think, though, that there will be something.
Yeah, like that's the sort of attitude that Netflix should have. However, a legacy newspaper, which talks about politics, maybe should provide you with information. Now, you can argue whether or not they need to endorse a candidate. They should at least provide you with this information.
Something interesting that people will take note of as we are 8 days out from this election, which is this anticipatory bowing down to pressure that some CEOs are taking, and they may never come to bear. Let's say Donald Trump loses this election. It would all be for naught. On the other hand, I do wonder when you try to make a deal like that in anticipation of a potential presidency, in this case Donald Trump's, we know that Donald Trump is not necessarily the most loyal person in the world. So it really just becomes, if you say one thing that angers him, he decides, I don't care what you did before the election, I only care about the here and the now. It's a very transactional relationship, Really fascinating. It's great to have you.
Great to be
Thanks
here, Vlad.
for coming by. Appreciate it.
Cameras in northern Israel captured their air defense systems activating. You can see the smoke rising in the sky.
Okay, so we're going to move on from all of the, they didn't really talk about the reasons behind it. They only talk about the Washington Post. Because because Jeff Bezos did come out with an op-ed stating why they were doing it. Still very, very silly. Yeah, so we're going to move on to what Israel's going to do next in regards to Iran.
Along with the sounds of sirens and explosions, the Israeli Medical Service said emergency workers are searching an area of a reported rocket strike. Officials not confirming yet any casualties. Meanwhile, preliminary talks for hostage and ceasefire negotiations in Gaza ramp back up. This all comes as Israel carried out its first open attack on Iran over the weekend. CBS News foreign correspondent Raymond Inocencio reports on Iran's response.
Liz, hi there. Israel and Iran now appear to be posturing, but holding back for now on any more military action. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says that his government will respond to Saturday's airstrikes with wisdom. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the IDF's attacks early Saturday had achieved their goals, and the IDF had described them as targeted.
What's so funny is Iran said maybe it was like a couple servicemen died. They didn't do that much damage. Like, people were expecting them to start like bombing residential neighborhoods and doing all of this, but it seemed to be a pretty coordinated strike, which, you know, good on Israel for showing a little bit of restraint, which doesn't mean much because they don't really do restraint.
And precise, and that they hit Iranian surface-to-air missile systems and missile production sites. Yesterday, Netanyahu addressed victims of the October 7th attacks and said that whoever hurts us, we hurt him. And that was a reference to the fact that these strikes over the weekend.
Right, so all of the babies, they're terror babies, they're Hamas, they hurt you, so they gotta be hit too. All of the terror babies, all of the pregnant women, all of the children, they're all terrorists, and so they have to die too. Makes me so angry.
Were a response to Iran attacking Israel back on October 1st. That was with nearly 200 ballistic missiles. So far, Iran's response has been muted. Iran's supreme leader called Israel's attack a miscalculation. If Iran does not strike back, this could very well be the end of this round of back and forth fighting. But a national security expert on Iran, who we spoke to here, said that truly avoiding a bigger regional war rests on ending Israel's operations against both Hezbollah in Lebanon and its conflict, of course, with Hamas in Gaza. The enclave's health ministry said that IDF strikes killed more than 80 people over the weekend and more than 800 people in the past 3 weeks in the north. And that is where Israeli troops.
Didn't realize that was gonna play. Okay. Sorry. I was just hitting the pause button. No, yeah, he nailed it. It's exactly it. How do you stop the regional conflicts? Just stop. Just stop. Like, pull out of Gaza. Stop attacking Lebanon. Stop. Do a ceasefire. It's what Hamas has been saying this. The Houthis have been saying this. Hezbollah has been saying this. Iran has been saying this. That if you stop attacking Gaza, we will stop attacking you. That has been the case since this thing started. And I don't know what needs to go through his thick skull. He doesn't care. Netanyahu doesn't care. He just wants to cleanse the region, turn it all into one big Israel, from the river to the sea. He wants to create the Greater Levant.
raided one of the last functioning hospitals and struck a school turned shelter for the second time in a week. Now, the IDF maintains that Hamas uses civilian infrastructure to hide both weapons and fighters. But now, efforts to work towards a ceasefire deal are finally happening again. CIA Director Bill Burns is in Doha now trying to restart those talks. Egypt has proposed a 2-day ceasefire and the release of 4 Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. Liz.
What would question 1 on the Massachusetts?
Okay. Yeah, so pretty much nothing has changed in the conflict. It's still going strong, folks. Again, not much in the way of new news. It's the same shit, different day. And it's gonna keep going on until somebody does something about it. Now, that somebody should be Joe Biden, because he can actually do something about it. All he needs to do is make one phone call. Just needs to call Netanyahu and be like, we're not going to send you any more money if you keep doing this. And then he stops. They just killed a UN driver in a UN marked car in, I believe, Gaza. They have killed something like 233 UN personnel over the course of this conflict. And again, nothing has happened. Like, I'm not even surprised, because, like, the UN peacekeepers just don't want to break out into full-out war. But it's no sanctions, no anything. They've literally killed UN personnel, and nothing is happening. So something has to happen in order for things to change, because on the current trajectory, nothing will change. Okay, we're gonna pivot gears again. We're gonna talk about the Massachusetts ballot questions. They are, there's 5, and I found the GBH News will talk about each and every one of them. So let's start with question 1.
Massachusetts ballot do? Question 1 would give the state auditor, currently Diana Dzaglio, the authority to audit the state legislature. A yes vote would give the auditor that power. A no vote would make no changes in the law. Massachusetts legislators famously operate one of the least transparent government bodies in the country. When Dzaglio campaigned to be state auditor, she made auditing the legislature a core part of her pitch. Dzaglio, herself a former state rep and senator, claims that as chief accountability officer for state government, her job includes scrutinizing how her former colleagues are doing their jobs. But last year, Attorney General Andrea Campbell ruled that under current law, Dzaglio can't audit the legislature without its consent, even though she can audit other government entities like state colleges and DA's offices, for example.
Yeah, they're doing their excuse or their reason for voting no is checks and balances. Like one legislative body can't legislate another legislative body. It's stupid because of exactly what she's talking about. They can still audit other government institutions like schools, DA's offices. So why not the Attorney General or the state legislator? Like, it's just like, because I think I know why they don't want to do this, because there's probably huge amounts of corruption that tends to happen when you don't have, structures in place to protect, to go after this sort of stuff, to like actually see what's going on, to be audited. If you're never audited, you're more likely to get away with stuff.
So, DeZoglio's trying to change the law, and she's drawn a wide coalition of supporters on the left and right. But opponents call DeZoglio's push a power grab and say that because the auditor is in the executive branch, giving her authority over the legislative branch would violate the separation of powers in the state constitution.
Yeah, it was the separation of powers. No, it's the checks and balances, which is in fact why she should be able to do this, because one branch of government should be able to check another branch of government to make sure. Like, the legislative should be able to check the executive too. Like, that's perfectly reasonable for them to want to do the same thing.
Suzanne Baum, who held the auditor's job before DeZoglio, opposes this ballot question. And even if it passes, litigation could follow. In summary, a yes vote would change the law to give the state auditor the authority to audit the legislature. A no vote would make no change in the law.
What would question 2 on the Massachusetts ballot do? Question 2 is all about whether the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, or MCAS, should be eliminated as a requirement to get a high school diploma. A yes vote would mean getting rid of the legal requirement to pass the test to graduate, as long as students pass classes that their school districts say meet state standards in English, math, and science. A no vote would keep passing the MCAS as a legal requirement to earn a high school diploma.
Yeah, this one just seems like a no-brainer. I mean, many teachers support this because standardized testing is not a good way to actually test what people know. And instead of like actually teaching people what they're interested in, which is still like curriculum appropriate, instead they're teaching how to take the test and what will be on the test itself, which isn't really a good way of like fostering knowledge, because you're just learning stuff in order to take a test and then it's right, it's all out. Like, there are better ways of testing people's ability to understand and comprehend what they're learning, rather than standardized testing or testing in general. Yeah, so this one is pretty good. I mean, yeah, I support this. I don't think even like the SATs now and ACTs and all of those college standardized tests don't even count. Many schools don't even count them anymore, because they've realized this exact same thing, that being able to take a test doesn't necessarily prove whether or not you actually are knowledgeable, can learn, because people have very different learning processes, and like all of these standardized tests, all they do is just set up so you can take more standardized tests and keep going and going and going, and then they don't really apply to, you know, the working world. You don't have standardized tests at an office job. It just doesn't happen. So it ends up like a lot of kids just end up slipping through the cracks because they can't take standardized tests.
Massachusetts students have had to pass the test to graduate since 2003. Last year, the State Board of Education reported about 700 students, or roughly 1% of the state's graduating class, had everything else required for a diploma except a passing MCAS score. And that's who Question 2 supporters, including the Mass Teachers Association.
Yeah, so even the Mass Teacher Association, they support this bill. And she nails it right here. It's just like students have hit all of the requirements. You know, all of the requirements to graduate, they hit. Until it comes to standardized testing, where they may not be the best. They might be on an IEP plan, which is an individual education program policy, one of those. Anyways, so if they have like a learning disability, or if English is their second language or something, they have a very specific program that works with them. And again, MCAS has been accommodating. Like I was on an IEP, and that just means I got extra time to take the MCAS, which I didn't really need because I was a pretty quick test taker. Even if I didn't do well, I was usually one of the first people done because so like having the extra time was nice, and then for a while you had to like write out the essays and they just let us type them instead, which was nice, I guess. But even still, there are people with, severe learning disabilities who might not be good at just taking tests in general, because taking tests is difficult, and it's not a good way to apply what you've learned. There are definitely different ways, and I mean, this all goes back to how our education system was built during the Industrial Revolution in order to keep kids, because they got rid of child labor laws. Your kids just couldn't stay at home, so you had to put them somewhere while you work at the factory for 8 hours a day. And so they put the kids in there, and originally wasn't really a place to like learn anything. It was mostly just to like keep kids in place. And so it's just like, yep, we're just going to give you tests, see if you learn the stuff. If you don't, you're stupid. And it's just not a good way of measuring intelligence or aptitude.
Point to when they talk about dropping the MCAS requirement. They say the test unfairly punishes students who are bad test takers, English language learners, and those with learning disabilities. And they say teachers use too much valuable class time teaching to the MCAS. Opponents, including Governor Maura Healey and Education Secretary Patrick Tutwiler, say it's an accountability measure, showing the schools and the subjects where students are struggling. Opponents also say getting rid of the test would mean different standards from school district to school district.
Okay, so I think that their argument is bullshit, because they're stating that it's a way to be able to see what school districts are failing and which are doing good. But again, measuring a student's performance in taking a standardized test does not necessarily correlate to how the school does in general. Because school funding is based off of property tax. So it's amount of people who own homes that determines a school's budget. So if you live in an area with high home ownership, like a suburb, you're more than likely going to have a better funded school, and that there's more resources available to those kids. So those kids are always going to take the test well. Their averages are going to be higher because they have more money than lower income areas. than, cities and stuff, which may not have those resources available. And thus the kids those who require more help aren't going to get the necessary resources that they need. So it's not really a good excuse or reason to, not go with this bill.
Making it harder to know what Massachusetts students know when they graduate. No matter what, students would still need to take the test. It's just a question of whether they have to pass it to graduate. So now the question is up to you. If you want to remove passing the MCAS as a requirement to earn a high school diploma, you vote yes. If you want to keep requiring high school students to pass the MCAS to earn a diploma, you vote no.
Yeah. I think it'll make teaching a lot better, because teachers are able to focus on actually teaching subjects that kids are interested in that still will meet requirements. Like, they'll still learn English, they'll still learn math, they'll still learn whatever else is required. They just don't have to focus on the test. And so even if students still have to take the test, but don't have to worry about whether or not their score will affect whether they graduate or not, is good. And so you'll have students who are just good test takers, and no matter what resources they have at their disposal, no matter what, all the stuff, they're gonna do well. But for those students who don't, it's no longer a worry for them to be able to graduate. Because our system is sort of set up where they're prepping for you to go to college. They want you to go to a traditional undergraduate school and get a 4-year degree. Now, in today's day and age, that's not really feasible. College is very expensive, and there's not a lot in the way of job positions that compensate you relative to the debt that you may have taken on in order to go to school. Now, for some people, college is a necessity. It's a good way. It's a good socialization program. It's a good way to learn, especially if you want to go into if you want to go into graduate school, or, a PhD program, or, you want to become a doctor, lawyer, all of these high-level jobs that require this sort of schooling. Sure, that's good for you. But for, Joe Schmo who's only going to school because it's what, is required of him, who's just going to get, an English degree, or not saying that English is a bad degree, but I'm saying that, or they're getting a communications degree. It's not something that you necessarily need, and you could get the experience just working or going to a trade school, where you actually get to learn some hands-on stuff, and you're set up for a better future. And I think that the whole MCAS thing will be good for those students who especially go to trade school, because then they can focus on their trade. They don't have to worry about passing this sort of testing. All right, the next question is about rideshare and DoorDash drivers being able to unionize.
What would question 3 on the Massachusetts ballot do? Question 3 asks voters if transportation network drivers, such as those who work for ride-hail companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, should be allowed to form unions. Drivers in Massachusetts can't currently unionize. A yes vote on question 3 would provide drivers the option to unionize, but not require it. A no vote would keep things how they are now. Union membership would offer active drivers, meaning those who meet a predetermined threshold of hours worked, the chance to collectively bargain wages, benefits, and working conditions with companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash. The state would supervise the labor activities permitted by the proposed law and would be responsible for approving or disapproving negotiated recommendations. Supporters of this ballot question say the law would improve working conditions, representation, pay, and benefits for drivers. In addition, supporters say a union would increase drivers' flexibility and independence and offer support to defend themselves against unreasonable account deactivations and loss of income. Opponents of the question say the law would eliminate the ability for independent contractors to be their own boss. It would raise prices for riders and invite lawsuits for preempting state and...
None of that stuff will happen. You can still be your own boss and be in a union. It just means that you have protections from companies doing predatory activities. It is better to be unionized, and so that you can collectively talk about this stuff, because an individual person probably doesn't have the resources to be able to fight any sort of pushback that they may get from any of these companies. Like if Uber decides one day to deactivate your account because for XYZ reason, you probably don't have the resources for a lawyer to be able to fight this, even though he might be in the right. With being able to unionize, you have a collective organization. Most likely you will have a union lawyer, somebody who will fight for your rights, and so you don't have to do this alone. But you also have the flexibility to be able to be your own boss, to work yourself. Sure, you'll have to pay union dues, but it's marginal in terms of the amount of money that you'll be making in a union when you can collectively bargain and make more money. It's also not going to raise prices. That's just like scare tactics. Union, organizations and industries where they do have unions versus those that don't, there's no price difference. Even when, the auto workers get a bump in pay, that doesn't bring over to the consumer. You're not going to be paying any more for a truck than before when they weren't making as much money. It's just not going to happen.
Federal labor law. Opponents also say the law would unfairly put the responsibility of setting wages and benefits on the Commonwealth instead of on private companies. Earlier this year, Uber and Lyft paid a $175 million settlement to Massachusetts after a years-long battle with the state's attorney general. The settlement guaranteed drivers earn at least $32.50 an hour, along with other benefits and protections, but doesn't provide union rights. To recap, a yes vote would provide drivers...
Yeah, so, and Massachusetts is already pretty good about it, but this will just make things easier. I know some opponents are like, well, it should be the private companies that should be setting these prices, or setting how much they pay their workers. And we all know that if that's the case, they're just going to try to pay them as little as they can because they want to make profits. And one of the largest profit suckers is labor costs. And so they're always looking to cut labor costs. And this will protect those rights. So this one's a no-brainer.
There's the opportunity to form unions to collectively bargain with companies on wages, benefits, and working conditions. Yep. A no vote would keep things how they are now, and drivers would not be able to form unions.
What would question?
Okay, so question 4 is about legalization of certain naturally occurring hallucinogens like psilocybin or magic mushrooms, mescaline, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, and a couple others too.
Question 4 on the Massachusetts ballot due. Question 4 would legalize certain psychedelic substances in Massachusetts with some strings attached. Ultimately, 5 natural psychedelics would be legalized, including psilocybin and mescaline, with one legal by early 2026 and the rest by early 2028. A yes vote on question 4 would legalize limited use and distribution of these psychedelics by individuals 21 and over. A no vote would make no changes to the laws governing those substances. Supporters say psychedelics can help with mental health problems like PTSD and depression. And they note that in contrast to the state's legal cannabis industry, you wouldn't be able to just go to a dispensary and buy some psychedelics to take home. Instead, you'd head to a licensed facility and use them there with guidance from an expert. But ballot question 4 would also legalize growing psychedelics at home in a space of up to 12 feet by 12 feet secured from people under 21, allow the possession of small amounts for personal use, and let people give away small amounts to other adults. Opponents say that would create a new...
Okay. Yeah, these are all good. These are fine. Because there have been... This will allow a more clinical observation of psychedelics, which is just a good thing because it has been proven to help with PTSD, with other mental health related issues. It's also good at combating opiate addiction, which is kind of the big one. So it'd be nice. Yeah, and being able to do it with a licensed, a clinician who can observe you and watch you and do all that stuff is good. Being able to grow it at home is nice. I don't really like the way that Massachusetts does its dispensary things. I think it's way too archaic. Massachusetts is a very interesting place because we are one of the most progressive states, but we are also one of the most regressive states in the way we do progression, right? Because in order to go to a dispensary, you need to go through level security, show your car, show your ID at every point of entry. Whereas in other states, like in Maine, you can just walk into a dispensary like you would, a liquor store or, any other store. There's no need to batten down security. So, and the whole creating a black market, there's already a black market. So maybe it'll people will start selling them, but it's the same thing with delivery dispensaries, which deliver to your house. They don't technically sell you weed. They don't deliver you weed that you buy. You buy a different item and they give it to you as a gift, which they can do under the law. So that you usually, if you do a delivery dispensary, they're giving you you're buying a t-shirt, an $80 t-shirt, and then they're giving you the weed for free. Yeah, so.
New unregulated black market. They also say kids and pets could end up being harmed. They warn that more people would drive under the influence, and they say those
Okay, the last points made are some of the more reasonable takes for why it shouldn't be legalized. Again, yeah, it's the same thing that's happened with legalized cannabis. There have been cases of, pets ingesting, edibles and stuff, and maybe, yeah, and driving under the influence. If you're going to take psychedelics, don't drive. Just don't do it. And I think, seasoned hallucinogenic users know this, that there is a very specific time and place to do it, and you need to meet certain conditions in order to have a good trip. And one of them is not driving, so just don't do that. But yes, there is concern about, children, pets getting into this stuff. And That's a legitimate concern. I can totally see that, but you should treat the stuff like you would treat a gun, right? You wouldn't just leave it out in the open. You put it in a safe. You put it in a place where, pets and small children just can't get to it. It's about, there's a level of personal responsibility there.
Designated facilities for purchase and use wouldn't be staffed by trained medical professionals, which they call a dangerous oversight. If ballot question 4 passes, it would also create a new state regulatory commission. And while municipalities could, quote, reasonably restrict when and where psychedelic sales and use facilities operate, they couldn't ban them outright. So, to recap, a yes vote would legalize the use, possession, and growth of some psychedelics under certain circumstances. A no vote would keep those things illegal.
What would question 5 on the mass?
All right. Yeah, so this is about question 5, which I am blanking on at the moment, but they will tell us.
Massachusetts ballot do. Question 5 is about how servers, bartenders.
Oh, right. This one is about making sure that those who have tipped wages, like servers, I think bartenders too are covered, wait staff, that sort of thing, that they get paid minimum wage plus tips. Because right now there's a tiered system where wage-based employees are paid a different wage when their tips are over the minimum. And this would just make sure that they would always get paid minimum wage, no matter how much they get in tips.
Bartenders and other tipped workers get paid, and where that money comes from. Right now, the minimum wage for tipped workers in Massachusetts is lower than the state minimum wage, and employers are supposed to chip in to get those workers to $15 an hour if their pay plus tips falls short. A yes vote would gradually phase out the lower tipped wage so that by 2029...
Yeah, this would just eliminate... There's a lot of wage theft that goes on in the restaurant industry. Like, restaurants are supposed to pay the difference. Sometimes that doesn't happen. More often than not. So this will just make sure that everybody's getting paid the same, whether or not you work in front of the house, back of the house, wherever. But those tip-based workers will be, they'll all be getting paid the same minimum wage. It's not you don't have to do a whole bunch of different math.
All tipped workers make the regular minimum wage plus tips. At that point, businesses could administer tip pooling, where tips are shared among all workers, including non-tipped workers. But they wouldn't have to. Supporters, led by the national group One Fair Wage, say the current reliance on tips leaves many service industry workers vulnerable to exploitation.
Yep.
Critics include the Massachusetts Restaurant Association. If this question passes, restaurant owners would be responsible for the added expense of paying their tipped workers the full minimum wage. They're also arguing that workers could end up forced to share some of their tips with other employees that don't serve customers.
Again, that's, as it said, it's an optional thing. They don't have to. They should. Everybody who works in a restaurant contributes in some shape or form. So they should, share in the rewards. Whether it be the busboy who busses all of your dishes, the dishwasher, the line cook, your hostess, anybody who works, who contributes labor in order to provide you with a service should reap in the rewards of the system in place. I don't like the tipping system. I think it's completely exploitative. Doesn't mean I'm not going to tip. Of course, you should always tip. Just because you don't believe in a system doesn't mean doesn't give you an excuse to be an asshole. All right.
Each side cites competing economic considerations. workers in Massachusetts face some of the country's highest costs of living. On the other hand, it's expensive to run a business here too, and the restaurant industry is still recovering from the pandemic. So if you want restaurant workers to collect tips on top of the regular minimum wage, and restaurants to have the option of creating tip pools, vote yes. If you want to keep the laws on minimum wage and tip pooling as they are, vote no.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Well, that is going to end our first portion of the stream. Now we're going to move on to the history of the CIA, which these are a series of videos done by creator Eyes Wide Shut, or Eyes Wide Open, excuse me. I would highly recommend you subscribe to them, do all of the YouTube stuff. In the first part of this, so this one is, I might just play like a couple of these today. They're 30 minutes to an hour long. Talking about the various aspects. This first part is about the OSS. Yeah, it's interesting.
I want this series to cover everything. Therefore, I will need to conduct some additional research for videos, which takes time. On top of that, I'm actually recording this intro after I'm finished the video entirely.
Okay, I bet.
And from start to finish, this 25-ish minute video, maybe a bit longer now with the intro, took me about 20 hours. I hope to be able to cut that down as I get back into editing and get back into the groove of things, but it still takes a long time. So, with that being said, I do aim to make one video a month. This may be an overly ambitious goal, but for the time being, it seems feasible. I hope that the time I put into these videos will pay off with a higher quality product in the end, so the wait should be worth it. Well, I've been rambling for a while. I guess there's no better time to start. You're watching Eyes Wide Open, and this is part 1 of the history of American intelligence. Welcome to the series.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
I have absolutely no recollection of destroying any document.
Told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages.
Now watch this drive.
The history of the CIA begins where much of modern history starts, during the Second World War. Shockingly, the United States did not have a dedicated foreign intelligence agency before the Second World War. The FBI handled domestic intelligence, much like it does today, and that was only founded in the early 20th century. It was led by its longtime director, the first director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. All other foreign intelligence was largely handled by the State Department and the Department of Defense. Before World War II, the entirety of U.S. intelligence capabilities and capacity could be found in a few disparate filing cabinets at the State Department. All this would change and balloon during the war, as the United States was caught off guard by Pearl Harbor in 1941. The surprise attack by the Japanese on Hawaii necessitated a response from President Roosevelt, where he created the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS for short, an innocuous-sounding agency that would oversee all intelligence and covert operations during World War II. Now, this is important here to make a note. Office of Strategic Services, on the surface, sounds quite, benign. This is something that was often used throughout the CIA's history. They would name operations, they would name departments, very banal sounding names to try to make the public unaware of the sinister undertones within those agencies. So, let's get into the history of the OSS and how the CIA became what it is today. I guess let's lay out a few quick things before we get into the actual history. Throughout this series, a general theme that will be explored heavily will be that of the CIA as an integral part of a parallel shadow government beside the elected government of the United States. Now, I want you all to hold on. This is language that is highly codified. It's been used often by the American right, especially since the rise of Trump, and right-wing populism has become very strong in the United States. I think that this is actually really muddies the water for serious conversations about the existence of a deep state within a country. The United States is not the only country in the world with a deep state. This can actually be observed everywhere. Pretty much any democratic capitalist country has a deep state to speak of. Let's just get into the explanation of it and the theory behind it. The theory of deep states and deep politics was developed by a man named Peter Dale Scott. And essentially, his theory goes that the United States has obviously an elected government, that being the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency. Although behind this overt government stands a largely unelected, unaccountable, and often reactionary wing of the government that acts as a guardian of elite interests and corporate profits. This is often termed the deep state. This term deep state has been hijacked by right-wing conspiracy theorists, as I've said, using it to denounce any government actors that they disagree with. In this series, we will be using the term deep state to mean any unelected officials that work to undermine the democratic will of the people of the country. And most of the time it will be the United States, but also all the other countries that will be impacted by the CIA throughout this history. Going by this definition, the deep state will include, in this series, just as a short list, the Department of Defense, primarily the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but we can also include the entire sort of security state, as it's called, which includes the Department of Homeland Security and a lot of other affiliated departments. Just for example, the Department of Defense also has an intelligence unit, so does the Air Force, so does the Navy. So all of these pieces together form sort of the security state. This deep state also includes the FBI, which can be seen quite clearly as a domestic counterpart to the CIA. It includes the defense industry itself, sort of what we're going to call the military industry.
Which pretty much does the same thing. They just do it domestically versus the CIA, which does it internationally. Can't really do that sort of thing.
Industrial complex. So essentially all of the industries in the United States that produce weapons, arms, military technology, these have a very strong role in American government and will continue to gain a larger role throughout this history. This will also include any industries that have maybe an indirect link to military. For example, the oil industry, fossil fuels, think tanks and institutions such as NATO and the International Monetary Fund, organized crime elements, for example, the mafia not only in the United States but across the world. This can include
which state industries, like the State Department and other organizations, have worked with crime syndicates in the past. So this makes a lot of sense that they're all part of the same sort of under the organized umbrella of the deep state, especially with the CIA. And in a bunch of the videos he talks about, they worked hand in hand with crime syndicates, drug smugglers, arms dealers, in order to promote their missions. in order. I mean, big one was Iran-Contra, where we were doing a whole big triangle where we send arms to Iran, and then using that money to fund right-wing, to fund the Contras, as well as providing them with arms. And then in tune, we were then sending cocaine to the United States, creating a crack epidemic. And so, the CIA and crime syndicates have worked hand in hand. And we wouldn't have such a big drug use, a big drug program, if it wasn't for the CIA.
Church institutions such as the Vatican, which will be very important with the history of Operation Gladio, which will be coming up shortly. And of course, arguably the center of this deep state network is the CIA. Now, it's important to note that these institutions are not always working explicitly together, right? I mean, we're not talking about all of these people, right? This is quite a large group of organizations I've talked about here, and you could be skeptical, and I wouldn't blame you for being skeptical that all of these people are colluding in a serious way to push their interests. The important thing is that these groups undeniably all have shared interests, those being capital, those being US empire, and those being anti-communism. These three central tenets come together in all of these institutions to create what could be considered a blob, or the deep state, a link of organizations, a network that moves in unison to push these goals forward, with the central piece being the CIA and arguably the security state as a whole. Now, as is typical of these deep institutions, the OSS was not created as a usual military establishment. Much like the future CIA, its offshoot, the OSS was quickly filled with members of the elite ruling class, which will be seen throughout this series, not only in the CIA, but across this entire deep state network, is that most of the people involved are not average folks like you and I. These are people that come...
Right, so this is what happens when you have a capitalistic, when your deep state, when your government is interested in preserving capitalism as a system, is you tend to see a lot of elitism, and that coincides with the security state. So a lot of the people who end up becoming in charge of these organizations are, in that upper echelon, whether it be, family members are some sort of giant of industry, or they're like a Washington dynasty, like the Kennedy, they're like a political family, a well-known family, Kennedys, the Rockefellers, all of these sort of people who have been integrated with the American industry, as well as in politics. So when you have, a sort of capitalistic structure like this, you tend to see these elites at the top. It very much mirrors feudalism, in which all of the power is really held up at the top, including, the more shadowy parts of it as well.
From Wall Street. These can be bankers, lawyers, business executives, former generals. These are the types of people that filled the ranks of the early CIA and the OSS. So it's important to note that these are not average US soldiers. These are people that come from the American elite class. So I guess we'll start with the first director of the Office of Strategic Services. The first director was William Donovan, otherwise known by his nickname Wild Bill. William Donovan's nickname of Wild Bill comes from the baseball player Wild Bill Donovan, who would coach the Yankees between the years of 1915 and 1917. He's most notable for being a World War I hero, and he was also a self-made millionaire Wall Street lawyer. During World War I, he served as the U.S. Coordinator of Information, which was an early intelligence arm of the U.S. Department of Defense. So when FDR created the OSS in 1942, Donovan was likely high on his list. He had some intelligence background, and Donovan was named as its director. Now, in the history of American intelligence, Donovan was largely overshadowed by his subordinates, especially a man named Allen Dulles, which we'll be talking about a lot in the early parts of this series. As the director of OSS...
Yeah, the Dulles brothers specifically will become instrumental in the clandestine operations of the CIA. They were Christians, call them fascists, who believed in American supremacy, believed that they were anti-communists, they hated communism, and wanted to snuff it out wherever it was, which it kind of becomes the focus after World War II, when we switch over from the great enemy of fascism, which, again, we never went to war. We only went to war with the Axis powers because we were attacked. We were more than happy to do business with Germany. And we were happy to do business with Japan. We were willing to give them tons of oil while they raped and pillaged their way through China, until it got to a point where it wasn't politically advisable. Again, we were also selling arms to the British, too, in a Lend-Lease program. So it's not like we didn't necessarily take sides, but we were willing to sell to all partners. So, yeah, and again, we were willing to sell to the Germans. We were willing to give them steel. We were willing to give them all sorts of resources. And then we got attacked, and then we chose a side. But we only went after them, not because of ideology, but because they were the enemy. We were more than happy to grab all of the resources that we could from them. We had no problem with getting fascists and making them in charge of our space program. Wernher von Braun, who was one of the people in charge of NASA, was a German rocket scientist who developed I believe the V1 and V2 rockets using Jewish labor. And he was a member of the Nazi Party. I'm not sure if he might have been SS too. But we picked him up and dropped him off in Alabama, and he was in charge of NASA. There are videos with him and Walt Disney, hand in hand, talking about the space program. Yeah, so we had no problem just picking up Nazis. We did not care about their fascist ideations. They also hated communists, who we in turn hated. Meanwhile, you have now the Soviet Union, which arguably is the reason we won the war. They're the first ones who went into Berlin. They liberated several concentration camps. They sacrificed the most. They took some scientists too, of course, but for the most part, they ended up murdering a bunch of fascists. And we got very upset over that, despite the fact that we had the Nuremberg trials and we're going to execute a bunch of them regardless. The Soviet Union was just, they just would not have it. They didn't do as much collaboration as we did. Because, again, the United States is a capitalistic, fascist leaning country. We say we have a democracy, but we have a two-party system, which are elected by an electoral college, which only really needs the votes of certain districts to be able to firmly skew an election. You have battleground states, and within that you have districts which pretty much determine who the winner of an election is. Rather than doing it by a popular vote, which is what you would do in a direct democracy, we as citizens do not vote directly for who we want in office, at least at the presidential level. That is decided by an electoral college, which again is also kind of a shadowy deep state sort of organization, because you have delegates, you vote, and then depending on how things sway, those delegates then decide who to vote for. And each state has a certain amount of delegates based off of population. And only certain states, like Nebraska and Maine, can split their delegates. So, if it's a 50-50 split, and I believe Nebraska has 4 delegates, you could get 2 for Kamala, 2 for Trump. Same thing in Maine, which is kind of a system. If we're going to have electoral college, it shouldn't just go one way or the other, which is where it is for the majority of the country. There should be, if we want to keep the electoral college, which I just don't believe should be a thing, but if we want to keep it, we should make it like those 2 states where delegates can be split up, because then it's more equal. It's more equitable. Because California, yes, it's a blue state. New York is a blue state. Massachusetts is a blue state. And then you have, red enclaves too, deep red states like, Alabama, Mississippi, who will always vote red. But you do have liberal enclaves in these areas. You do have conservative enclaves in deep blue states too. And it's making it so like their voices aren't heard. Their voices don't matter. If you live in Massachusetts and you vote for Trump, it's not going to matter. It's the same as like putting a different candidate on the ballot. It doesn't matter. Because we're a deep blue state. My state is voting for Kamala whether I voted for her or not. Unless we have a large unless we have a large group that doesn't end up voting. Unless the majority of people vote third party or somehow vote for Trump. But I don't think that's going to happen. So our states are always going to be counted. California, which has 55 delegates, which is a lot, but they're deep blue. So you can always count them as Democratic votes. And then you have other states which do have high electoral college votes, but they don't And so those will always be counted. So it's really up to a few battleground states to determine who gets 270 electoral college votes. It's like down to like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, I think Wisconsin too. It's down to like a couple states to determine who wins the election.
He worked as a coordinator, ensuring that his agents were undertaking successful missions. And most importantly, his army bona fides provided a cover for the OSS and the future CIA, as he was perceived as a respectful and dignified man by the security establishment. This is an important key. The CIA and the OSS were often scrutinized by the security state as they believed that they could take over that role. So having Donovan as a military man, a former military hero, some would say, being the leader, gave a certain sense of legitimacy to the new OSS. Now, despite him being a quote-unquote honorable man at the time, most accounts of Donovan portray him as a blunder, failing to achieve success in his exploits, and overall just not having the success that the future CIA would have. For example, in a report written by Colonel Park about the OSS in 1945, this report was presented to President Truman when he was thinking of creating a new spy agency. Donovan is portrayed as a drunk that does not hire based on merit, but based on the, quote, old boy network of connections from Wall Street. Now, this is pretty glaring, especially since we know that elite...
Yeah, elitism, nepotism, it makes a lot of sense that this guy would get a job like this, even if he did have, a substance abuse problem. He just knew the right people.
Is deeply ingrained in the OSS. Now, this is corroborated by a story of when Donovan went to Romania he left a briefcase filled with critical OSS intel in a brothel in Romania, which was later intercepted by Gestapo agents. The report notes that he often forgot about agents that he sent across the world, such as an OSS agent that was stranded in Liberia. He had also accidentally ordered to blow up some OSS agents in France in another blunder. Donovan was subsequently dismissed by Truman and replaced by Roscoe Hillenkoetter, a U.S. naval officer, to become the first director of the CIA. So at the end of the day, President Truman did not have faith in Donovan, and he was fairly ineffective as a leader of intelligence. And I think Truman saw more respect in and more dignity in an actual operating military officer, even though Hillenkoetter, as we'll see later, was not exactly a saint himself either. Quite a devious man himself. Now, this is bringing us to another important theme and a recurring subject in U.S. intelligence, is that the idea that you never really leave the CIA once you are you retire or once you are discharged, whatever it is. Often these agents remain intimately involved, and Donovan was no exception. He would remain an integral part of the agency, and officially he returned to public life after the war, returning to his law practice. However, he remained present as an advisor to Allen Dulles during his tenure as director of the CIA, and was present for many landmark operations. Now, just to wrap up on Donovan here, he may have been fairly irrelevant to our larger history, but he was the anchor that brought together all the agents in the OSS. Many of these agents would form the original cadre of the CIA. Many of the CIA's most notable and criminal acts would take place while these original characters were in control. So we can really see Donovan as the godfather of modern American intelligence. Now, even if you haven't read any history about the CIA, it is likely that you've heard the name Allen Dulles. He is arguably one of, if not the most important person in modern American history. He gets talked about quite a bit, a lot of glowing sort of op-eds about Allen Dulles, which I think are pretty shameful, as probably one of the most reprehensible characters in American history, but still incredibly influential.
Yeah, he was personally responsible for the destabilization of many, many nations, whether it be through organized coups or clandestine activities, any sort of... Wherever there was communism, Allen Dulles was going to be there to make sure that they weren't. Okay? Yeah, he's, you can personally find him responsible for the reason why many countries, in Africa, in South America, the global South in general, are so destabilized.
In this next section, which will be probably the majority of this part, we will outline Allen Dulles' career at the OSS, how he became a spy, and how he will be a major fixture of the next episodes, how he's going to rise to become the first civilian director of the CIA, and how this man had such impact on American history. So, that being said, I just want to leave one last note before we get into Allen Dulles. Most of this background information about Dulles is from a really great book by David Talbot called The Devil's Chessboard. It's actually a book that I have quite fond memories of reading, because it actually got me back into reading after taking quite a large break. It is a great read. I highly recommend it if you're interested in any of the topics talked about here, because a lot of my information is sourced from there, and David Talbot is an incredible author and very readable. So highly recommend The Devil's Chessboard. Let's talk about Allen Dulles. So Allen Dulles found himself at the upper echelons of the American elite class. His maternal grandfather, John W. Foster, was Secretary of State under President Benjamin Harrison, and his uncle by marriage was Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State. So these are some serious links to the American democracy, American government, and Dulles himself came from one of the preeminent East Coast families of lawyers and Wall Street men.
So again, history of this sort of like nepotism, elitism, where you have, Wall Street executives, lawyers, people of, East Coast elitists, who these are the people that found our government. And this goes all the way back to the founding of our country. I mean, you have somebody like George Washington, who may have been a simple man, but he had a large plantation. He was relatively wealthy. He was a war veteran. And then you have, the Adams family, John and John Quincy, Samuel Adams. You have all of these people who were related, who in turn became like staples in American history. And they're all related. They're all very well-to-do. They're all highly educated. You have people like Thomas Jefferson, who, was a plantation owner and did relatively well that way, and so was able to fund his education, and in turn he was able to fund a school and all sorts of stuff. So the America's history of elitism and nepotism runs deep.
He was born in Watertown, New York, and then he would go on to graduate from Princeton University, and he would get his law degree at George Washington University. Before the war, Dulles worked as a lawyer at the prestigious Wall Street law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, which his brother, John Foster Dulles, who would be the future Secretary of State under President Eisenhower, was a partner of. So it's important to note that there is a severe conflict of interest here between the Sullivan and Cromwell list of clients and Allen Dulles' duties as an OSS agent. Let me elaborate a bit. So Sullivan and Cromwell's clients included many Nazi-adjacent firms such as IG Farben, who manufactured the Zyklon B gas that was used in the Nazi gas chambers.
Yep. So you already see, we were embedded with fascists. We were willing to represent them because they were capitalist industries. And of course, their money was still good to us.
This also included Krupp AG, which is a German arms manufacturer, and many other notorious firms. What we see here is a person that is stuck between two worlds, right? They are working for the OSS that gets its orders mostly directly from President Roosevelt, who's trying to...
And again, when you have this sort of intersection between government and industry, there's definitely going to be some conflicts of interest. We're definitely going to do things on behalf of a corporation, like what we did in Hawaii, where the governor was, Samuel Dole of the Dole Fruit Corporation, where we literally stole the island, where we stole the Hawaiians from their kingdom, annexed them in order to be able to use their land to grow food, to grow fruit, specifically for the Dole Corporation, who in turn also has exploited the global south to create food, to sell fruit at the expense of underpaid labor, and all sorts of things. So, but our government was instrumental in making sure that happened. They got military support, the Doles did, in taking over Hawaii, and they had full support of the United States government. So even before these clandestine organizations began, even before the OSS, there has been a link between capitalist industry and our government.
Defeat the Nazis, but they are also representing their clients, who are these firms that are either fully Nazi, such as IG Farben and Krupp AG, or affiliated with the Third Reich. So this had a serious impact on Dulles' decision-making and some of the operations that the OSS would go on. Dulles' resume does not end there. He was also elected as the president of the Council of Foreign Relations in 1927, which is an influential conservative organization made up of business elites, bankers, industrialists, high-ranking government officials, and former military men. According to the organization's mandate, quote, their mission is to use interventionism to make the world safe for democracy, which
we gotta make sure that we invade them so that they get democracy. This kind of echoes to modern day, especially in the Iraq War, where we went in under false pretenses and we're like, oh, we're gonna bring them democracy. And then all we did was destabilize the whole region.
Obviously is quite in line with Alan Dulles, who has access to the OSS, which is one of the largest operating agencies in the world that can make interventions happen. Dulles used this platform on the Council of Foreign Relations to influence others towards his firebrand view of America's future. He would state at the 1946 council meeting, so right after the war, that the United States should not go too far in its efforts to cleanse Germany of its Nazi past, because, quote, most men of the caliber required to run the new Germany suffer a political taint, i.e., they were Nazis.
And this ends up being the case when one of the founding members and one of the, I believe, the heads of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Association or organization, was a former Nazi. So again, we were willing to forgive all of their crimes that they committed, in order for them to continue, because we shared a common enemy, which were communists.
further entrenched Dulles as a clear Nazi sympathizer, which he was throughout his entire career. We'll continue to show more examples. It continues to come up. Before we move on to Allen Dulles' exploits during the Second World War with the OSS, let's discuss IG Farben, the German chemical conglomerate that was on the Sullivan and Cromwell customer list, a bit before we move on to other things. The relationship between the Dulleses and the German chemical company IG Farben further displays where the Dulleses' sympathies lie during the Second World War, which were likely with the Nazis. IG Farben represented one of the pillars of the Reich's industrial base. It was formed as a conglomerate of several of the top German chemical and pharmaceutical companies in the 1920s.
What's Bayer? What's Bayer doing there? Wait, you mean the aspirin guys were Nazis? Yeah, the aspirin guys were Nazis.
We're talking a massive firm. We're talking one of the biggest companies in Germany. This was essentially a monopoly that included all of the major chemical producers in Germany and was one of the largest companies in the Reich. So IG Farben supplied many of the essential supplies, such as synthetic fuel, which IG Farben had the patent for at the time. And during the rise of Nazism in Germany, the Reich supplied price guarantees and purchased a 5% equity stake in IG Farben to help fund the increase in capacity of synthetic fuel production. So we're talking literal state control of this company. We are talking about a direct link to the Nazi party in IG Farben. And who is their legal representation? It's the Dulles brothers. So with that being said, IG Farben would produce a massive share of the fuel that would run the Nazi war machine. Because remember, the Nazis didn't have access to huge natural oil supplies, so they relied heavily on this synthetic fuel that was produced by Farben. IG Farben is not the only sinister company that the Dulles brothers were working with at Sullivan and Cromwell, but it represents the cornerstone of the Dulles' complicity in Nazi terror. It is important to note that the intelligence agents casted from the Wall Street circles never stopped serving their former clients. This is an important note to make because it's almost like a revolving door. It's often this metaphor is used that, somebody from the private sector will come into the intelligence agencies or into the Pentagon, and they will still have their former clients' best interests in mind. It's just natural. I mean, a lot of these people continue to be shareholders. They continue to have deep, intimate relationships with the people on those boards. So it would make sense that they would continue to have sympathies for those former clients. And of course, the Dulles brothers knew that the war was going to end eventually, especially Allen, and that he might have to go back and work for Sullivan and Cromwell. So of course, he wants to continue to see the success of that firm, which means continuing to serve IG Farben and serve the Nazi Reich. So with that being said, the revolving door was in place here with Allen Dulles. He continued to serve his clients and, as we will see, defied the orders of the President of the United States and the State Department at every turn when it came to working with Nazis. So I guess I want to share one more anecdote about this, just to sort of really hammer home this Nazi connection, because I think it's quite important to understanding really how, cynical, calculating, and inhumane these people were. So both Allen Dulles, the OSS agent, and John Foster Dulles, the Sullivan and Cromwell law partner, actually had personal ties with the Nazis. Allen Dulles met with Hitler in 1933 while on a diplomatic mission with the State Department. So Dulles, was writing letters back, correspondences back to his State Department colleagues, and he displayed curiosity and interest in the rising fascist party. He saw potential business deals with Nazi Germany and was particularly enamored by the Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels, who led the cruel anti-Semitic media empire in the Reich. Despite all his horrible features, Allen Dulles remarked that he admired Goebbels' quote, frankness and sincerity. Lovely to hear. John Foster Dulles, the elder brother, he arguably admired Nazis openly, and he was even more of a Nazi sympathizer than his brother.
Just a great, two great guys that happen to be in charge of the clandestine organization that was, in charge of infiltrating these enemy political movements.
He insisted that all correspondences from Sullivan and Cromwell to their German clients were signed off as Hail Hitler And until his death in the mid-60s, John Foster Dulles publicly displayed his admiration of Nazism. So really, it runs deeper than just wanting to, serve their clients. The Dulles brothers saw some serious potential in Nazi Germany, not only from a business sense, but also from a geopolitical sense. So it's important to note this because it will keep coming up, especially with the CIA's continued support of fascist governments around the world. And I guess that leads us into another key tenet of the U.S. intelligence network and of U.S. intelligence history, is that these people are rabid anti-communist. This was ingrained in the institution at its most fundamental level, as most of its key members were members of the American ruling elite, who benefited from the capitalist world order. The Dulleses certainly fit into this anti-communist mold. Broadly speaking, American anti-communists viewed the Nazi regime in Germany as a useful fixture in Europe due to their violent anti-communist stance. They were seen as a bulwark against the Soviet Union. The Nazis believed in private property, this aligned with the Dulleses, and even had a policy of reprivatizing businesses, wherein they restored seized property to former owners, especially the seized property of Jewish people. Anti-communist elites, such as the leaders of the OSS, viewed the Nazis as workable allies against communism in Europe. Therefore, the OSS and the subsequent CIA would often ally, arm, and fund fascists to fight the Soviet Union and other socialist states. This phenomena gave rise to multiple alliances forged between the OSS and high-ranking Nazi officials, but also led to what we can call stay-behind organizations. So essentially, underground organizations of former Nazis or I guess Nazi sympathizers that are armed and funded by these institutions to remain in Europe to keep it away from the communists. So we'll get into that a bit later. With all that being said, I think it's fairly clear that the OSS was largely ineffectual at infiltrating and sabotaging the Nazi regime during the war, and imparting any useful information regarding enemy troop movements or enemy activity at all. I mean, this could have been chalked up to incompetence. I mean, Wild Bill was seen as largely incompetent, but I see it more as a lack of effort due to a lot of the high-ranking OSS agents having clear Nazi sympathies. What is clear, though, is that the OSS's main successes, if you want to call them that, these were by no means successes, if you're, an anti-fascist, came near the end of the war and usually involved collaborating with Nazi elements. By outlining OSS activities during the end of the Second World War, we will see the laying of the groundwork for the future CIA operations throughout Europe, and their activities that are aimed at circumventing European democracy to ensure that communists or even left-leaning governments will never be elected in Western Europe.
And that was pretty much their primary goal.
In the next part, we will be covering Operation Sunset, which is Alan Dulles' harebrained scheme to broker a separate peace with Nazi Germany and to ensure that the Nazi Reich would exist post-war. That being said, this is all I've got for today. These videos take a really long time for me to make, and I put a lot of effort into them.
All right. So that was the first part of the history of the CIA. It's about the OSS. Done by Eyes Wide Open. Give them a subscribe, like, do all the things. I found their stuff very interesting. I think that's going to do it for today. I'm just going to do the one video. We'll probably end up covering these at a later point. But anyways, thank you all for joining me today. Gotta make myself nice and big. Thanks for joining today. I will hopefully do another stream sometime this week. Maybe do some gaming stuff. Maybe play, I don't know. I have a couple game ideas I could do. But yeah, if you're interested, please be on the lookout for those. All of my information is available there. There's also my link tree is in YouTube. Yeah, I'm on all the platforms, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. TikTok too. But yeah, just want to thank everybody for joining in on the Dcpc, DC's Political Corner. And I will see you next time.